As is displayed, the reading this morning will be from Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to go 1 through 5. We're going to add one verse. That's what Brother Randy wanted me to do. So I know it says 1 through 4, we're going 1 through 5, Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first.
Good morning to everyone. We're certainly glad that you're here. If you're visiting with us, we are honored that you have decided to visit with us this morning. Hope that you have been uplifted by what we've done so far. Hope you will be uplifted by the sermon. That remains to be seen. But I would invite you, if you don't have a Bible with you, get out a pew Bible. Here at Fisher's, we preach from the Bible. Because that's one thing that doesn't change. Man's philosophy changes, the world changes, what man thinks is right and wrong changes, but the Bible does not change. And that's one thing that we can lay hold of. Brother Chase, as Joel mentioned, is doing a gospel meeting in Decatur Township. That's in the southwest corner of Marion County. And so you have to endure me this morning, but come back tonight because you'll hear a good sermon from John Smith tonight. I know that because I've heard John preach before. And then a week from today starts our gospel meeting with Brother Bill Sanchez. So we hopefully that you are excited about that as we, again, try to prepare ourselves for the life that is to come. As you may surmise, I'm going to talk a little bit about time this evening. There are several things that we've talked about in the last few weeks. I've had comments with people that make me think about the idea of time, the concept of time, what time means to us, how we handle our time, how we view time. Because even though time itself is a constant in the sense that we can count on 24 hours a day, 60 hours in a minute, 365 days a year, and that doesn't make any difference whether you're here in Indiana or whether my daughter is in Slovenia today going to Venice, my daughter Allison. And guess what? In Venice, it is September also, just like it is here. In Venice, 24 hours makes a day, just like it is here. It's constant. And yet, as we look at it as humans, it becomes relative. And that's what we're going to focus our thoughts on here this morning. But the very first idea, and I'm going to give credit to Gary Miller on this because he was talking to me about this a couple Sundays ago. You know, time was created by God. To God, time has no meaning, does he? Because he's eternal. He's been there forever. He is forever. He will last forever. In the Hebrew writer talks about Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Christ being part of the Godhead has existed forever, so time has no meaning for that. But what Seth just read for us in Genesis, and we rightly focus on the idea of God creating the world, God putting in to the heavens the light, which we call the sun, the lesser light, and the night, which we call the moon. But in verse 5, he says, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and morning were the first day. Day, that idea, that concept of day, created by God. So that we have a way to measure ourselves, so we have a way to conduct our lives, so we have a way to realize that we are not eternal in nature other than our souls. We are finite in nature. We have a beginning, we have an ending. And so the concept of time, in fact, was created by God. But I said before, in nature it's constant, isn't it? You know, if you could go back in time 200 years here in the state of Indiana, there was a young man named Abraham Lincoln who was growing up in southern Indiana back in 1825. He lived here from 1816 to 1830. He lived right down in southern Indiana, what today is called Spencer County. But you know, in Abraham Lincoln's time, a day was 24 hours, wasn't it? A year was 365 days. And we're here 200 years later, and it's the same. The day is the same. And in 200 years from now, when we're long dead and gone, guess what? There'll be 24 hours a day. There'll be 365 days in a year. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't make any difference whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Europe or whether you're in South America. We all understand that today is the 7th day of September. You know, we don't have to go to England and say, well, over here it's mid-February. No, it's the 7th of September in England. It's the 7th of September anywhere that we go. The next day will be the 8th of September, and it's the year 2025. Come December 31st, guess what? It's going to be a new year, 2026, and it's going to be 2026 here, the same as it is across the world. Time for us is constant as it's created. And yet, as we look at it, it's relative, isn't it? We know that with our children, don't we? With our children, an hour can seem like an eternity, can't it? When are we going to be there, Dad? When are we going to be there, Mom? Come on, I got something now. I want something to happen now. I have to wait for a whole hour. I have to wait for a whole day. That seems like an eternity when we're young. And yet as we get older, and you listen to say, so we're going to play an oldie from the year 2002, and you think, how can 2002 be an oldie? I was 47 years old in 2002. How can that be considered an oldie? But for a whole generation of people it is, because that's 23 years ago now, wasn't it? And we wonder as we get older how time seems to go faster and faster and faster. It's the same 24 hours. It's the same 365 days. But to us, from a relative standpoint, it seems to go very faster. And there's some biblical concepts of this. If we look over back in the Psalms, where Joel was reading from us earlier, but we're going to look in the 13th Psalm. We're going to look at this Psalm of David. And he starts out in the very first verse of the 13th Psalm. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? For David, for whatever he was going through, it seemed to be a long time. He's pleading to God, how long do I have to endure this? Verse 3, consider me and hear me, O God, and light my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed against him. David, at the time he was writing this psalm, for whatever he was going through, it seemed like God was not responding to him. He was not answering him. How long, God? How long do I have to wait? Time was moving slowly at this point in David's life. And so he pleads to God, how long? How long do I have to wait? Back in the book of 1 Samuel, the first king of Israel, Saul, was ready to attack his enemies. But Samuel, who was the judge and who was the only person authorized to make the sacrifice, had to come and make a sacrifice before Saul could attack. And Saul was looking at the light and was looking at, from a military standpoint, his advantages, and he was thinking, how long do I have to wait on this Samuel to get here? I need to attack now. I can't wait. And so what did Saul do? He presumed to make the sacrifice himself, didn't he? And God called him to account for that. But for Saul at that point in time, it was, how long do I have to wait? How long is the time coming until I can act? The book of Habakkuk. Don't want to disappoint you, Joel. We're going to do some Old Testament. The book of Habakkuk. Let me get my pages turned here. The very first chapter, the very first verse. Starts out as follows. The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me the iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds. Habakkuk was living in a time when the nation of Israel was going down the wrong path, when they were worshiping Baal and they were worshiping other idols, and they were saying, oh, we're worshiping God, but they weren't. And Habakkuk saw what was going on. And he was crying out to the people, go back to God. And the people were essentially saying to Habakkuk, we don't want to hear you. And so he cries out to God, how long? How long will this go on? How long will this happen? Because again, for him at that point in time, it seemed like nothing was happening. Nothing was going right. No one was hearing him. It reminded me a little bit of Elijah when he had the test on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And remember the dramatic test on Mount Carmel where God sent down the fire and burned up the sacrifice. Elijah was the only prophet of God, and there were 450 prophets of Baal. And the people who saw that were just astonished. They said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And Ahab, who was the king, and Jezebel, who was the queen, said, we're going to kill you, Elijah, because you've embarrassed us. And Elijah had to flee for his life. Remember, he fled to a cave down in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula. And he felt that he was the only one left. How long, God? I'm crying. I'm doing these things for you. I'm trying to show that you're the God of heaven, and no one is listening. And God tells Elijah the same thing he tells us over and over again in the Psalms. Wait, I will do things in my time. Wait on the Lord, Psalm 27:14 says, wait on the Lord, wait on God. God will bring about his plans in his time. But we sometimes think that time just stretches out so long, and we have to wait so long. I'm reminded of Abraham, who was 75 years old and who was childless, and God came to him and said, Abraham, you're going to be the father of a great nation, and your descendants will be like the sands of the seashore. And Abraham's thinking, how can this happen? I don't have any children. How can I have descendants? 11 years went by. Still had no children. Abraham was 86 years old. His wife was unable to bear children. But he remembered that promise God made. God said, Abraham, you're going to be the father of a great nation. How can I do this, God? And so Abraham came up with his own plan, remember? Sarah gave Abraham her handmaiden, Hagar. And through Hagar, Abraham had a son. Now, that wasn't the son God promised. His name was Ishmael. He was born when Abraham was 86 years old. You look back in the book of Genesis. But when Abraham was 99 years old, 24 years in our time, after God had spoken to him, God again appeared to him and said, next year you're going to have the son I promised. Well, what about Ishmael, God? Well, Ishmael's not the son I promised, Abraham. You're going to be the father of a great nation, and you're going to be a father at 100 years old. And Abraham said, how can that be? But God told Abraham to wait. Now, for Abraham, that 24, 25 years had to seem like an eternity. And that's how sometimes it seems to us. That sometimes time is relative. We just think things are not going to happen, things are not going to occur, and we forget that God is in control. And that God will bring about things in his time. And we need to learn that lesson, to be patient with God, to be patient. If God makes a promise, it will come true. If we are patient, it will come through, especially in this age where we live in an age where we've got computers and we want things now, we want AI, we want an answer right now. God says sometimes we have to wait. Still only 24 hours a day, still only 365 days in a year. But it can sometimes seem like an eternity to us as we're waiting. But the flip side is, sometimes time seems to speed up, doesn't it? Sometimes time seems to go much faster than what we expect it to be. And what prompted me to think about this lesson too was way back in the book of Genesis again. It's where Jacob and his family had come down to Egypt. Remember, Joseph had been sold off to slavery and had his brothers had all deceived Jacob and said Joseph was dead. They brought him that coat. They put blood on it to make him think he was dead. And finally, after years and years, circumstances, God again working his time, brought Jacob and his family back together to Joseph. In the 47th chapter of the book of Genesis, Jacob is being presented by Joseph to Pharaoh. Joseph was second in command at this point in time to Pharaoh. In the 47th chapter of the book of Genesis, let's start reading here in verse 7 here. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of my years of pilgrimage are 130 years. Now, if we just stop there, we think Jacob was an old, old man, wasn't he? Hardly anybody today lives to be 130 years of age. If you make 100, we call it, we make big parties, things like that. Nobody lives that point in time. Jacob said to Pharaoh, I'm 130 years of age. But look at the very next sentence he makes here. I'm 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. Can you imagine being 130 years old, but to Jacob and saying, I've only lived a short time. I've only lived a few years. Now, to us, that would seem like an eternity, but to Jacob, he says, few. I've only lived a few years, Pharaoh, 130. And in fact, he was right. His father Isaac lived to be 180. His grandfather Abraham lived to be 175. So looking at it from that perspective, he was relatively young, I suppose. But for us, looking at it today, we'd think, yeah, this man was an old, old, old man. And yet to him, he says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Just a few days, Pharaoh, 130 years worth. And I'm not a good enough mathematician to do it in my head, but take 130, multiply that by 365, and how many days you got? You probably got 20 or 30,000 days. But he thought it was just a very few period of time, a short period of time. Job tells us his life was just like a vapor, just like a breath. Job chapter 7, verse 7. It says, my life is just like a breath, like a vapor. And James kind of plays upon that. James chapter 4, where he talks about us when we make our plans. When we live our life as if we all think we're going to live to be 130 years old. And we make our plans and we say we'll do this at some point in time in our life, this at some point in time in our life. And usually we're making those excuses because we want to live a lifestyle that we know is not pleasing to God. And we say, I want to get my wild oats in. Sometimes we use that phrase. And I'll become righteous. I'll become a child of God much later in life. James chapter 4. James says, starting in verse 13, come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we would go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. What you now boast in your arrogance, all such boasting is evil. Don't live your life saying, I know I'm going to live to be 100 years old, and so I'm going to do what I want to with the first 50 years of my life, and then I'll have time to serve God. You don't know what you have. You don't know what you have. I myself am 70 years old. I had a friend of mine named Tim Biddle. Most of you knew Tim. He didn't make it to 60, and his life was over like that. Now, he didn't know what his life would be. I don't know what my life will be. But we have to live our life in recognition that, life sometimes can be short. Sometimes we speed up that clock, so to speak, or we live that life like we speed up our clock. And we don't live our life according to what God would have us to do. Over in the 39th Psalm. David again talks about the brevity of life. And David was a man who lived, I presumed, about my age, about 70 years of age. How many years he had. Over in the 39th Psalm. Starting with verse 4, David writes, Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you. Certainly every man at his best state is but vapor. David is saying, give me wisdom, God. Give me wisdom to understand that my life is finite, that I should not put off till tomorrow what I know I should do today, because tomorrow may never come. And so as we talk about the fourth point here, if we understand that, if we live our life understanding that, life itself to us is relative. Life to us is precious. Life to us will be here and gone before we even know about it. How do we live our life then, knowing that? Not as children do, because they don't have that recognition yet. But as adults, we understand about the fragility of life, about the uncertainty of life. But one thing Peter suggests to us is that knowing that, we need to be focusing on spiritual things rather than physical things, things that we know that don't have any real value, things that we know that we can't take with us. We read in the papers about somebody very rich passing away, someone who had lots and lots of money, and what good is that money doing them right now? It's not doing them a bit of good, is it? At one time, Howard Hughes was believed to be one of the richest men on the face of the earth. Howard Hughes passed away. What good are those riches to him? They're left behind. They're left behind. The part that we have that's eternal is not measured by how we look, by how tall we are, by how much hair we have or we don't have, by how much money we don't have. It's measured by what's inside us, our soul. That's what's eternal. Over in 1 Peter chapter 4, Peter writes the following: Therefore, since Christ, verse 1, therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. For he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. For we have spent enough time of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, abominable idolatries. In regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. They will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this reason the gospel was preached also to those who are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. Peter says, realizing that our time is short, don't waste our time on things that really have no value. We argue about things sometimes that really don't mean a whole lot. And when we lose a loved one, we wonder sometimes, why did I argue with them about this? It doesn't seem that important. Being a lawyer, as I tell people, the worst fights that I see in 45 years of practicing law are not among strangers. They're among family. And they're fighting over things that, from where I'm sitting as a lawyer, I think this is not worth it. This doesn't make any sense. People fighting over 20 acres of scrub ground in Owen County. It wasn't even worth $10,000, but they were fighting tooth and nail and spending more money in attorney's fees than what it was worth, but they didn't see it that way. It was so important to them. Now, those folks are all dead now. That 20 acres of ground in Owen County is still sitting there. It's owned by somebody else. It's not important. We live in a world where it emphasizes the carnal things, doesn't it? Live life to the fullest. Get drunk. See the beer commercials all the time. Sleep with whoever you want to. We see that all the time on TV and the movies. Marriage is not permanent in the world. Marriage is for as long as you want to be with that person. You find someone else, get rid of them. That's what the world says. That's not what God says. And Peter says, you know what? If we recognize the fact that our time is short, we shouldn't be living that way either. In fact, we should be living in such a way where the world says to us, why are you living different? Why aren't you out at the bars on Saturday when they got all the football games on, or this afternoon, opening weekend of the NFL? The bars are going to be full of people drinking and having a good time and rooting on their teams. Why aren't we out there doing that? We need to have an answer for that. Are you religious fanatics? You actually go to services 3 times a week? 3 times a week you spend 7 hours out of your 168 hours a week in church services? That seems like an excessive amount of time. Do we have an answer for that? Do we set the example? Peter says the time has passed for us to live like that. The time to act is now. Solomon, over in the book of Ecclesiastes, And as you read Ecclesiastes, you realize that Solomon was a man who was blessed by God with worldly wisdom. And yet he forgot his godly wisdom. We read like Proverbs. We read some of the Psalms are by Solomon. Ecclesiastes was written when Solomon was getting old. And he was realizing, I think, that some of the things that he had done were foolish. And he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, he's writing to young people here. Remember now, he says, that your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, the clouds do not return after the rain. In the days when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dim, when the doors are shut in the street and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of the bird and all the daughters of the music are brought low, and they are afraid of height. Solomon says, realize you have physical advantages of a young person that you're going to lose over time. I'm always reminded in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus went off to pray and James and John were there and he was away for an hour and he came back and they were sleeping and he woke them up again and said, I need you at this point in time. Stay here with me. He went back to pray again and came back and what were they doing? They were sleeping again, didn't he? You remember what Jesus said? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. When you're young, when you're 20 years old, you can do things that you cannot physically do when you're 70. Your mind is sharper than it will be when you're 70. I can guarantee that. I can speak from experience. You will have people that you meet and encounter that you will not meet again as you grow older in life. If you're in high school, you'll have friends in high school that you will lose touch with when you go to college. If you're in college, you have friends that you will lose touch with as you go into adult life. Solomon says, remember God during those young days, because they'll go by quickly. And you'll have a chance to influence people that you won't have a chance to do again. Realize that time is short. Realize that time is fleeting. Over in Psalms chapter 90, written by Moses, by the way. Moses gives the same admonition that David did, as we read in the 39th Psalm. In the 90th Psalm, and it's interesting here, Moses writes this because Moses himself lived to be 120 years old. But he writes in the 90th Psalm here, the days of our lives are 70 years. And if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Who knows the power of your anger? For as the fear of you is, so is your wrath. So teach us, Moses says, teach us to number our days. In other words, have a recognition that life is short. Realize that we don't have forever to do what we know what we need to do. Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And again, Moses himself lived to be 120. When Moses was 80, he was standing before Pharaoh and they were just getting ready to go on that 40-year journey through the desert of Sinai before they got to the promised land. And you know what? Moses didn't get to go in, did he? Remember? Moses didn't go. He led the children of Israel all that period of time, put up with all their shenanigans, the golden calf. But Moses himself did not get to go in. Moses says, God, teach us to number our days. Teach us to have a recognition of the fleetingness of time and to utilize the time that we have. That's why the Hebrew writer tells us in Hebrews chapter 3 to utilize today. You know, there's an old saying I heard some point in time. It said, yesterday's like a canceled check. What good's a canceled check? It's not. It doesn't have any value anymore. Well, it's been cashed. He goes, tomorrow's like a promissory note. What good's a promissory note today? It's not any good because it's a promise of something in the future. They say today is ready cash. Use it. You go out to eat. You can't give the waiter a promissory note, say, I'll pay you next, like Wimpy, I'll pay you next Tuesday for a hamburger today. It doesn't work that way. He said, we want our payment now. You can't give them a canceled check. Say, hey, well, this check was good 2 weeks ago. Here, take this. No, we want money now. And that's why we have to live our lives recognizing that. The 3rd chapter of the book of Hebrews. The Hebrew writer quoting from the book of Isaiah that says, therefore, in verse 7, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was angry with that generation, and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. And of course, he's talking about the children of Israel. How all those people, all the hundreds of thousands of people who were over age 20 who left Egypt, only 2 out of that mass of people got in, Joshua and Caleb. The rest didn't. The rest didn't. Because they would remain faithful to God, even though they could see his power, even though they walked through the Red Sea on dry land, even though they could see the pillar of fire to lead them. They could see the manna miraculously appear on ground. They could see God's work, and yet they were more happy than ever to worship that golden calf that Aaron made for them, wasn't it? Here's our God, O Israel. And God said, they're not going to get in. You're not going to get in my promise. The Hebrew writer continues, and beware, brethren, lest there be any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. The deceitfulness of sin. The deceitfulness that tells you, wait till tomorrow. Wait till the next day. Be like Agrippa and say, when you've heard the gospel preached to you by Paul, you've almost persuaded me to be a Christian. Well, Agrippa, why not be a Christian right now? Well, I'm not ready yet. Or Felix, who said to Paul, some more convenient time, I'll call you back. What do you think Felix will feel like on the day of judgment? When God said, Felix, you had the opportunity. It was right there in front of you. And you said, I'll do it later. Agrippa, you were right there. You heard what Paul said. And you said, I'll do it later. We sing that song sometimes. It's called Almost Persuaded. It's based upon what Agrippa said. Almost persuaded, the last verse says, harvest is past. Almost persuaded, doom comes at last. Almost cannot avail. Almost is but to fail. Sad, sad, the bitter wail, almost but lost. Don't be almost a Christian. Recognize the brevity of time. Recognize that even though you're young and you think you've got your whole life, and hopefully you do have your whole life ahead of you, that life will slip away quicker and quicker as you get older and older. If you haven't become a Christian, the opportunity is going to present itself here in about a minute and a half. To obey God. What does God tell us to do? He tells us that we need to hear God's word. That tells us all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us who are of the age of accountability fall short. But that we have a way back to God. That God wants to reconcile us to him. His desire is for all men to be saved. But we have to do it on his terms, not our terms. He says you need to believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and came and went to that sacrifice. We've just remembered that sacrifice in the Lord's Supper. And Jesus says, what? Come to me, ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Spiritual rest. But how do we do that? We hear the word. We realize that we've made changes. We need to make changes in our life, that we've made mistakes in our life. But God, you want us to be back with you. So what do I have to do? Same thing that the people, when they asked Peter on the day of Pentecost, men and brethren, what shall we do? Peter said, repent and be baptized, every one of you. The Philippian jailer, when he was ready to kill himself, and Paul and Barnabas said, don't kill yourself, or maybe it had been Paul and Silas, you check me on that. Don't kill yourself, we're still here. The jailer was overcome. What do I have to do? You've been singing to this God. Tell me about this God. And that very night, Paul talked to him, and that very night they were baptized. Why? Because they had needed to wash away their sins. Paul himself was a good example, wasn't he? When he was there in the house of Ananias, hadn't eaten for 3 days, was fasting because everything that he believed was true turned out to be untrue. And he was trying to persecute Christ. And Ananias said, Paul, what are you waiting for? Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins. But realize that baptism is just a start. It's not the finish. It's just a start. We have a life to live. And we will still stumble at times. And we still need God's grace and God's forgiveness, and he's willing to do that for us. We're going to sing a song here, Just As I Am. You don't have to have any special knowledge other than the knowledge that you're a sinner, that you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and you can start a new life today. If you need to come forward right now as we stand and as we sing.